Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. We are on the road in Detroit. I'm Amy Goodman. To talk more about the history of the auto industry, I spoke with Rich Feldman last night. Actually, he took us on a tour of Detroit. We met outside the former Packard car plant. Rich is a former auto worker, longtime community and labor activist here in Detroit, board member of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center.
My name is Rich Feldman, and we're here at the Packard plant on Mount Elliott and East Grand Boulevard in Detroit, Michigan. And we're here because it's the space, and if you look around the place, that you can get a sense of what happened in the 20th century. You can get a sense of the size of what it meant to be in the center of the industrial age, and you can also get a sense of the pain and the destruction that's taken place as the 20th century ended. So I come here as I do tours, and I do a lot of tours for folks as we come around, as people visit Detroit, especially with the U.S. Social Forum coming here or the Allied Media Conference this week, as a way to talk about history, as a way to talk about what the industrial age has meant, what it meant to be in Detroit. And Detroit is really not only the epicenter of the crisis and the pain, but also, as we'll talk later on, the epicenter of a tremendous amount of hope and rejuvenation taking place.
So tell us about this building.
This is a Packard plant, and the Packard plant was Packard Motors, and it was built and designed by Albert Kahn, and it's the first building that had support structured steel and metal going through all the facility to make it last as long as it has. And it was opened in 1906. So we're talking 104 years ago. And Packard Motors was a company that produced luxury cars. And to get a sense, Detroit being the home of the automobile and the assembly line was a place where factories like this were being built and tens of thousands of workers would be working every day. It's a building, it has 50 buildings. It's the size of 7 Cobo halls where the U.S. Social Forum will be. It used to have 11,000 workers here every day, okay? And 11,000 workers making a good living, taking parts and being a parts assembly facility, assembling automobiles, engines for Packard Motors. Eventually, during the war, it was a facility that made engines for Mercedes for the war effort. And it closed in 1956. So we're talking, it's been closed
half a century.
Half a century, and it's still standing. So from 56 onward, it was used as small factories and small storage places. And the way the story goes, in the 90s, it was used for rave parties. And then Mayor Archer said that he was going to tear it down and do something. So they pushed all the small businesses out and small factories and small warehouses out. And it's been abandoned for the last 10 or 15 years. And on a daily basis, people come here and we'll take, if you look over there, we'll take some of the steel and scrap to the point where some of the walls will just come tumbling down. But I come here because it's a way to talk about the history and to understand that the auto industry was the motor of the 20th century of the economic American dream. To understand that in the 1930s at the Ford Rouge plant, there was 100,000 workers under one roof. And now, within the United Auto Workers, there are fewer than 100,000 GM, Ford, and Chrysler workers. So to understand how much the country was changing, going from agriculture to industry, and giving people a way of life that they thought would go on forever, we thought would go on forever. But I come here because it also shows the amazing pain. When you look, it just, and the pain of not just during the times that it was successful, but what's left. And the auto industry, to get a little sense of the auto industry, is to understand that Detroit was once 1 million people in the turn of the century. It goes up to 2 million in 1950, and now is down to about 850,000. And 1/3 of the city is now vacant land.
So tell us where we're going, Rich.
We're driving from the Packard plant to the GM Poletown plant, and we're going up East Grand Boulevard, which is the boulevard that goes from the east side to the west side and was once the border of Detroit before Detroit expanded to 8 Mile.
An 8 Mile is?
An 8 Mile is the divide between Detroit and the suburbs. When you look around here at the Poletown plant, it's so important to understand that this was the belief that this Poletown plant would be the hopes and the dreams of continuing the economic American dream of auto workers becoming middle class. And the fact that our standard of living went up and up and up. But I come here because it's a way to talk about Detroit history and to understand 1980. This area had some 5,000 people living here, some 3,500 homes, 115 businesses, churches and hospitals. And what happened was during the 80s, to understand the auto industry, you have to go back to the OPEC, the development of OPEC in 1973, 1974. From 1945 to 1973 and 1974, the U.S. has a full monopoly, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, essentially, of auto production in the United States and auto sales in the United States. And to understand that after World War II, Germany and Europe and Japan are totally devastated, so we're the only ones that survive as a nation, and therefore we're the only ones producing automobiles. 73, end of 73, OPEC happens, the oil petroleum economic conglomerate comes together, and they say, we want some of these resources. We want some of the oil. You can't just take it at your whatever price you want. And I remember paying 22 cents a gallon before then, and we all know what we pay now. But what they were really saying is the rest of the world, it was their turn to get some of the resources back. The other thing that was happening by the late 70s is Japan and Germany and Europe were beginning to make their own cars. And they were beginning to sell their cars in the United States. And so there began to be competition for the first time. So that moment in American history from 45 to 73 and 78 is sort of the American century, where we believe this is how it's going to be forever. And Coleman Young, who was the mayor who gets elected in 1973, was a friend of radicals, was a friend of was an active union supporter, was a friend of the Communist Party, very progressive guy, believed that he could bring back jobs to Detroit. And how significant his election was, we have to take a moment back, because before his election, Detroit had gone from being a predominantly white population to an increasing, growing, and majority African-American population. And in 1967, we had the Detroit Rebellion. And the Detroit Rebellion happened for two fundamental reasons. It happened, one, because young people began to recognize that there would be no jobs for them. And two, because the white occupation army that had been brutalizing and killing citizens, African Americans in Detroit, was totally out of control. And people responded to that. And we're very clear that that was a rebellion, not a riot. We had a riot in 1943 where African Americans were killed. This was a rebellion against where the city was going, where the country was going. And out of that comes the election of Coleman Young. And it was a great victory